Something big is brewing across the United States right now, and if you have not been paying attention to the sky the last few days, now is the time to start. A large storm system is barreling toward the country, and it is going to trigger a chain reaction of severe weather before handing off to a massive heat wave that could push temperatures back into triple digits in places that have not felt that kind of heat in a long time. Behind the storm tracks, there are some real surprises waiting. Reinforcing pushes of Canadian air are going to sweep down through the Great Lakes even as intense heat surges north into the plains ahead of a brand new storm system developing this weekend. And on top of all of that, there is a potential tropical system trying to spin up out in the Atlantic. The next several days are going to be some of the most active weather this country has seen in a long time. So let's get right into it, because there is a lot to cover. Let's start with today, which is Wednesday, and today alone, we are tracking 3 separate slight risk zones for severe weather. The most significant of the 3 stretches across the Ohio Valley and into the Great Lakes, and this is the zone where every type of severe weather hazard is on the table: damaging winds, large hail, and even a tornado or 2. The other 2 zones are sitting out near Denver, Colorado, and across the Ozarks, and those 2 areas are going to be dealing mainly with straight-line winds and large hail rather than a tornado threat. Even with that split, today is shaping up to be a widespread and active day of storms across a huge stretch of the country. The most eye-catching piece of today's setup is the potential for significant damaging winds. And by significant, we are talking gusts in the range of 60 to 70 miles an hour across the Great Lakes and down into the lower Mississippi River Valley. Out in the high plains, the wind threat gets even more intense, with the possibility of gusts reaching all the way up to 80 miles an hour. That kind of wind is capable of snapping trees, ripping off roofing, and knocking out power to a lot of people. So if you live in either of those corridors, today is a day to keep one eye on the sky. Hail is also part of today's story, and the highest threat for the big, damaging stones is centered right over Colorado. Away from there, most of the hail threat drops down to what you would call pocket change size. Small stuff, but it will still be widespread, stretching up and down the Mississippi River and reaching as far north as northern Michigan. As for tornadoes, today's overall risk sits at just 5%, which is on the lower end, and there is a real chance that this small tornado zone actually gets trimmed down even further in future forecast updates. Storm mode today may end up leaning more toward clusters and lines rather than the kind of isolated rotating supercells that produce strong tornadoes. Still, there's enough instability and shear in the atmosphere that if everything lines up just right, a couple of tornadoes are not out of the question, especially in one particular stretch of the country. That said, the ingredients are not screaming out a picture-perfect tornado setup for today, so while it is possible, it is far from guaranteed. The zone to watch runs from around Champaign, Illinois, up through Saginaw, Michigan, and includes Detroit, Toledo, and Fort Wayne. But if there is one spot that stands out above the rest, it is the area right around South Bend, where the tornado threat is highest. Anyone in that corridor should have more than one way to receive severe weather warnings today, because if things escalate into a serious tornado threat, coverage will go live to keep everyone updated in real time. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you do not miss that if it happens. Moving into Thursday, the severe weather threat picks up and shifts east into the mid-Atlantic and northeast. There is a slight risk covering New York, Pennsylvania, a small sliver of New Jersey and Maryland, with a broader marginal risk surrounding that zone. The main concern on Thursday is damaging wind, but there's also a chance of small hail and maybe an isolated tornado or 2 scattered across Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. So while Thursday is not expected to be a blockbuster severe weather day, it is still going to bring real impacts to a large chunk of the Northeast. Now let's walk through the timing in a little more detail, because knowing when storms arrive matters just as much as knowing where. For today, storms are already ongoing across Michigan through the late morning hours, and then by the middle to latter part of the afternoon, new storms are expected to fire up right around or just east of Lake Michigan. These storms are likely to organize into more of a linear, line-shaped mode fairly quickly, and that tends to suppress the tornado threat because rotating supercells have a harder time holding together once storms merge into a line. Because of that, a strong, long-track tornado does not look likely in this environment today. That said, the best shot at seeing an actual tornado is going to be over in northern Indiana, somewhere around the South Bend and Fort Wayne corridor, and the timing for that peak risk lines up with roughly 3 to 5 o'clock this afternoon. If you are anywhere near there, that is your window to stay especially alert. As the evening rolls on, storms are expected to be arriving into Detroit, Toledo, and Muncie by around 7 o'clock, and then by 8 to 9 o'clock, that activity pushes into western Ohio and central and southern Indiana. Through this stretch of the evening, damaging wind remains the primary concern, and the tornado threat, while still present through 9 o'clock, drops off to extremely isolated after 10. Once we get past midnight, the whole system starts falling apart as it pushes into Kentucky and southern Ohio, finally winding down after a long day of active weather. Out in the high plains, today's setup is honestly pretty. Standard fare for late August. Storms will keep firing up around and east of the Rockies, and the main hazard there is a straight-line damaging wind threat, very similar to what played out yesterday in the Texas Panhandle, where widespread damaging winds tore through the Amarillo area. That pattern should continue through the late afternoon and into the early overnight hours, meaning the next 24 hours in that region are going to stay fairly stormy. There's even a chance some of that activity reaches toward Dallas-Fort Worth tomorrow, which honestly would be a welcome break for anyone down there who has been dealing with the relentless heat. Over in the Northeast, today's severe weather threat is mainly going to be an afternoon story. Damaging wind looks like the top concern, but if any storms manage to organize into supercells, there is a chance of an isolated tornado as well. Expect a lot of clustering storms forming in a band that stretches from around Burlington, Vermont, all the way back through the Washington, D.C. area. Damaging wind remains the headline concern across that entire stretch, but the isolated tornado risk technically extends the full length of that corridor too, from D.C. up through Vermont. This activity should carry into the mid to late evening before daytime heating fades and storms lose their fuel. By around 10 o'clock Eastern Time or so, most of what is left should transition to non-severe. Friday looks calmer overall, nothing especially dramatic on the docket, but the Carolina coastline and the broader southeast are still going to see a fairly stormy day. Expect widespread thunderstorm activity with damaging wind gusts as the primary hazard, and no real tornado threat to speak of. This is going to be pretty standard late August storm activity, and it is expected to stretch in a long band from New Orleans all the way up to Virginia Beach. Meanwhile, out across the high plains, Friday should be quieter, though Saturday and Sunday could bring a return of big storms across the northern plains and Midwest. That brings us to the weekend, and this is where the forecast gets a lot more interesting, and admittedly, a lot more uncertain. A brand new storm system is expected to take shape across the northern plains, and while there is still quite a bit of uncertainty about exactly how strong the system will become, the Dakotas and even northwestern Minnesota look like they could see an elevated threat of severe weather on Saturday. Then moving into Sunday, that same storm system is forecast to push a bit more severe weather into the Great Lakes region and down into the Central Plains. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty in exactly how this evolves, but Saturday is looking like a day with strong southwesterly flow. And that kind of setup can support a more organized tornado threat, depending on how the low-pressure system develops. If severe weather does show up in the Midwest on Sunday, or even into Monday, it is more likely to lean toward a straight-line wind threat, since the flow is expected to shift to more of a westerly direction by then. But again, this is one of those setups that could shift quite a bit as we get closer, so it is worth keeping an eye on. Looking further out, by the middle of next week and heading into the first week of September, there are signs pointing towards several more rounds of at least isolated to scattered severe storms, with areas like Minneapolis, Chicago, and back through Columbus and Cincinnati all in play. All signs point to next week being another active one on the severe weather front, and honestly, there's no real end in sight to this pattern right now. It has actually been kind of a stunning stretch of weather. This has been, without question, the most active, severe weather August on record in terms of national coverage over the past 4.5 years of doing this. You can largely thank El Nino for this pattern, because while the Atlantic has been almost eerily quiet on the tropical side, that same overall pattern has been fueling a nonstop stream of severe weather across the country. And it looks like that trend is going to carry right on into September. Now let's talk about the heat, because that is the other major storyline here. For folks down in the southern plains, there is no end in sight to the heat right now. However, if you live across the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, or the Northeast, there is actually some relief coming. Temperatures are set to fall back into the 40s, 50s, and even some 60s for overnight lows by Friday morning, which will feel like a genuine cool down after a stretch of warmth. But do not get too comfortable, because as we move into the weekend, all of that heat is going to build right back up across the central and southern plains. It has been a while since places like Iowa and Nebraska have hit the 100-degree mark, but that milestone looks like it is going to make a return on Saturday, driven by very strong southerly flow pulling up out of the Gulf. At the same time, remember that low-pressure system tracking across the northern plains? Well, the combination of that system and the incoming heat is going to help intensify the warmth building across the Midwest and Central Plains through Sunday. Then, by Monday and Tuesday, a sweeping cold front is expected to move through the Midwest, and that should bring another round of cooler air to areas near Chicago, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Meanwhile, it looks like it is going to stay hot down around Kansas City and St. Louis, potentially even into the first few days of September. So all in all, we are looking at a real weather roller coaster over the next several days. Heat, storms, cool downs, and then heat again, all cycling through in a fairly short window. And worth remembering, we are now less than a month away from the official start of astronomical fall, even though it certainly will not feel that way for everyone. Let's shift over to the tropics for a moment, because there is some notable activity brewing there too. Right now, there's a very high chance that the next tropical storm forms in the Atlantic within the next few days. If it does form, it would be named Tropical Storm Dolly, and it is expected to take shape in the main development region of the Atlantic. As of now, there is roughly a 70% chance of formation both within the next 2 days and within the next 7 days. This system would be tracking generally to the west, but there is a lot of uncertainty about how far it actually gets. It is not clear whether it will even reach the Lesser Antilles or whether it makes it into the central Atlantic Ocean at all. What does look likely is that it will run into some wind shear as it pushes westward over the coming days, which could limit how much it is able to strengthen. Outside of that potential system, the Atlantic has otherwise been remarkably quiet for this time of year. The Pacific Ocean is telling a completely different story right now. It is on an absolute roller coaster of tropical activity. There have already been a number of tropical storms forming out there, and there is currently a system sitting in the eastern Pacific, along with 4 separate areas being watched for further development, all located south and east of Hawaii. The good news for now is that no impacts to land are expected in the near term from any of these systems. But the broader pattern remains very active, and a big part of the reason for that is the same El Nino influence driving so much of this year's weather. Water temperatures out there are running very warm right now, and that warmth is expected to keep fueling additional tropical storm development over the coming weeks. So this is a story worth continuing to watch closely. So, to bring it all together, here is where things stand. Today brings a multi-state severe weather threat spanning the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, Colorado, and the Ozarks, with damaging winds as the headline concern and an isolated tornado risk centered near South Bend, Indiana. Thursday shifts that threat into the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, again with wind as the main hazard. Friday calms things down somewhat, but still brings stormy conditions to the southeast and Carolina coastline. The weekend introduces a new and still uncertain storm system taking shape over the northern plains, with the potential for a more organized tornado threat on Saturday, before trending towards straight-line winds by Sunday and Monday. Meanwhile, a serious heat wave is set to intensify across the southern and central plains through the weekend, even as parts of the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and Northeast get a temporary break with much cooler mornings on Friday. And out in the tropics, the Atlantic is watching a likely new tropical storm named Dolly try to organize, while the Pacific remains extraordinarily active with multiple systems developing simultaneously. It has genuinely been one of the most active and unusual stretches of August weather in recent memory. A strange mix of relentless, severe storms, an oddly quiet tropical Atlantic, and now a looming heat wave all tangled together into one chaotic pattern. And if the signs holding right now are any indication, this active stretch is not slowing down anytime soon. It looks like it is going to carry right on through the final days of summer and straight into the start of September. So stay weather aware over the next several days, keep multiple ways to receive warnings close at hand, and keep checking back for updates as this whole pattern continues to evolve. Because with a setup this active, changes can happen fast, and it is always better to be prepared a little too early than caught off guard.